it seems like Joe Schoen's plan is for like to save his job with more mediocrity. Like if he can just get like a 7 or 8 win season this year, then the real rebuild can kind of begin next year.
What is up, everybody? This is the Sharp Angles podcast. I am Raymond Summerlin, and we are back for our second episode with the one, the only Roto Pat, Patrick Daugherty, where we are talking about his GM rankings, which you can find over at rotoworld.com. I'd highly recommend you go and check that out. We already spent longer than we expected to talking about the best GMs in the league and those GMs he had ranked inside of his top 10. We are back, though, a second episode here to talk about the worst GMs, the GMs that we have ranked at the bottom. And if we're talking about the GMs ranked at the bottom, we have to talk with the one at the very bottom who's in a very interesting situation, partly of his own making, maybe partly not of his own making. That is Joe Schoen of the New York Giants, who you had ranked at 28. You don't rank the new GMs. It's fair to them, but it was the lowest of your existing GMs.
He was, and I'll start. Is it Schoen? I always want to say Shane, by the way. Schoen.
We also don't know how to say Getunxt, apparently, or the GMs of Green Bay. This is one of those things when you are you remember when you were a little kid and you read it, and you just would read all these words, and someone would say a word to you like in public, and you'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. And they tell you what it was. You go, I had no idea it was pronounced this way. We are being corrected by producer Romney that it's Shane.
It is
so
Shane.
I apologize to the Shane family for any offense I caused you, but I think Pat's probably about to go worse than just pronounce your name incorrectly.
Well, here's the deal. Pat. So yeah, Shane, and by the way, you say being a kid, it's part of being a writer too. You write a player name like 100 times without ever having to say it out loud. So what I always say about Joe Schoen in the bottom spot is, I keep saying this every time I'm talking about the article, that there's a big difference between the worst GM in the NFL in the year 2025 and the year 2015, where the past 10 years, there's just been this transformation of NFL front offices where you're not getting the wild cards or the rogues nearly as often as you used to. Like we're not getting Dave Gettleman's, basically, the guy Joe Schoen replaced. There's kind of only one genuine wild card GM right now, Terry Fontenot in Atlanta. And where GMs who are failing, they're doing so in more respectable fashion. But I would also say that's part of the problem, is that groupthink is kind of settling in, and it's like trades are risky and like draft picks are so valuable. And we're kind of getting like a really samey approach from all 32 teams, and maybe just less willingness to take risk than we used to get. But Joe Schoen, so the table was not set well for Joe Schoen. When it's Daniel Jones as the franchise player, that's going to be a problem. And it's really a problem after you make like a Cinderella surprising playoff run with Daniel Jones, your first year as your quarterback, where he faced a really fateful decision. Like, do I, quote, have to pay Daniel Jones or do I not? Because no one, even after that run, really believed Daniel Jones is the answer. But he chose the respectable option. I quote unquote, have to pay Daniel Jones. We know what happened next. And so Joe Schoen, it's not like he's been like offensively bad, but he made a wrong decision there, which I would say is not even being second guessed. It was first guessed at the time. You have a roster that's gone from 9 wins to 6 wins to 3 wins. And then his approach to try to fix it, I just feels like kind of like the Band-Aid approach, which you'd call honestly the Kenny Pickett approach, where he knows he needs a quarterback, but then so his solution is take one at number 25 overall. Like, how many franchise quarterbacks fall to number 25? Like, there's a reason the Jaxson Dart was not a lottery pick. And it seems like Joe Schoen's plan is for like to save his job with more mediocrity. Like, if he can just get like a 7 or 8 win season this year, then the real rebuild can kind of begin next year. Like, are you really going to save your job with 7 or 8 wins in year 4? And so, like, my short explanation for Joe Schoen was he wasn't given a great setup, but lots of guys are not given great setups, and then they exceed that setup. Joe Schoen has not exceeded the constraints that were given to him. And I've seen very little to suggest, he's going to have this job in 2 years' time. And 3 wins last year seems likely to be fired to me. He's number 28 right now.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned it. I think it's perfect is that he and Brian Daboll as well were both victims of Brian Daboll's success with the
They were
like they're, I don't know if this would have worked out better for them, but it would have they would have been in a better position to make a change at quarterback, if not for that first year. And so it puts him in a tough spot. And I've said this before, actually, we do unit rankings for the preview book. The preview book's available, sharp.football. The Lions chapter, free, available right now. Go and check it out. But you can also get $5 off using promo code SHARP5, Warren Sharp's 2025 football preview. And I have been consistently saying that I think this Giants roster is better than you think it is. They actually ended up lower in my rankings than I expected them to, but that's because I weight the rankings, and I weight quarterback, and I weight offensive line. But you go and look at some of the places, I had their front seven ranked number 1 in the league. Like, it's very good. You go and look at their defense as a whole, they've got talent there. Wide receiver is not bare. Running back is not bare. But as it turns out, quarterback and offensive line are really important. And it's not great. And I think your point there about, can we ride mediocrity to keep our jobs? I actually think they have to go the other way. Like, how long can you sit Jaxson Dart? Like, it feels to me their only chance of still being in power in 2026 is that Jaxson Dart is good. Like, that's, to me, if you win 6 games or 7 games with Russ, to me, that's not going to do it. You have to start Dart. You have to get him out there. And that's what makes, they had to have their contingency plans. And I get it with Russ and Jameis. Please play Jameis, just for all of us.
Please.
Please play Jameis. But the Dart is the thing that's going to save your job. That's the only pathway to it, in my opinion. So I have to assume we see him pretty soon.
I think we will. I do think signing the 2 veterans, I felt like was the tell, where he wants to try to limp his way to 7 or 8 wins, and then to tell everyone, listen, we redshirted Jaxson. Now Jaxson, Patrick Mahomes. Well, you didn't like what the Chiefs did with Patrick Mahomes? He's the best player in league history. They sat him a year, and I think his plan.
Like your idea. I like your idea of I didn't know we didn't like Patrick Mahomes. I like that
exactly.
That guy at the meeting. It's fantastic.
I do think that is his plan, is to limp his way through. Say, okay, now we've redshirted and developed Jaxson Dart. Now the real plan begins in 2026. But your take on it is also quite plausible. Where they're going to pull the ripcord as fast as possible, throw the rookie in, which should be a humongous disaster, Jaxson Dart in week 5 or 6. And then to see what happens, because they're living on borrowed time. I mean, I think a lot of people were probably surprised they weren't fired this offseason. Yeah. It felt like a natural endpoint to this era of Giants football. And so that's another thing that it's hard to not creep into your mind when you're doing these rankings. Well, this guy's just not going to be here next year. It doesn't even really matter what I think. He's clearly getting fired. And I feel like Joe Schoen the Giants do crave stability so badly, which is why they kept them this extra year. But I find it very hard to believe Joe Schoen is still the Giants GM a year from now, or especially 2 years from now.
Also, since we're talking about Russ, Jameis, and possibly Jaxson Dart as their quarterbacks, invest in Darius Slayton in fantasy, because I believe there will be some deep passes thrown. We're gonna slide a fantasy thing in there for sure. Want to move on to the guy you had ranked 25th, a few spots ahead of Joe Schoen, and that's Chris Ballard, a name that I also sometimes say incorrectly because I grew up one of my best friends, Chris Ballard, because he says it correctly because
I've never heard that. That's got to be a weird Bayou thing, but I digress.
Yeah, it's a weird Bayou thing. Some of us grew up in the Bayou. It's fine. It's neither here nor there. But Chris Ballard, he was just the classic cautionary tale of never hitting on a quarterback. That's what Chris Ballard is, as we're talking about GMs. Well,
Chris Ballard, though, he's just such a weird one to rank. I could have put him in the hardest ones to rank because every GM deals with owner interference. But as we know, the late Jim Irsay always had his heart in the right place, but interfered to the degree where he literally had his GM hire a coach off television mid-season. That's a level of interference even in the NFL, even with Jimmy Haslam, that you don't usually get. So it was so hard to know where Chris Ballard ended and Jim Irsay began, or vice versa, however that analogy actually works. But a guy, too, where he's kind of haunted by, he got off to such a great start. And when he had Andrew Luck, and he was kind of known as a GM who turned up talent wherever he could find it, where he'd find good undrafted free agents. Maybe he'd find a restricted free agent. Maybe he'd find some cheap, some second tier free agents, some nice day 2 or 3 picks where he was accumulating talent every which way early in his career. But then the Andrew Luck bomb dropped, and that seemed to Jim Irsay kind of got really, really impatient after that too, where it was each solution was more short term than the next, basically with the Colts. And where Ballard, I feel you can't quite. He's like a reverse Jason Light where like you can't quite get rid of the memory of the early good years, but the recent years have been so lean. But then again, it's like his slate is swiped clean. Maybe now we'll see the real Chris Ballard again. That now that the power dynamic has changed in Indianapolis, but he's just a really weird guy where like, yeah, the longer his track record has got, it's gotten less impressive. But at one point he seemed like such a good GM, Ray. And
well, I believe he won GM of the year at one
he
point.
Did.
So,
like,
so.
Yes.
That's the level we're talking about. And it's funny because that roster has gone, they kind of did a Cleveland Browns, right? They did the best roster in the league that's just looking for a quarterback, and they made it work with some of that rotation of veteran quarterbacks, right? Think of the Phil Rivers year and things like that. To now they're, I would say at best, an okay roster that still doesn't have a quarterback. And the big swing you took at quarterback appears to be a massive bust. And speaking of Joe Schoen, you now have Daniel Jones as well. And so like, it's a really tough spot. You talk about, the dynamic in Indianapolis and what we're going to see here now that unfortunately Jim Irsay has passed away. Like, I do wonder, we're talking about people who, you're talking about Joe Schoen, the smart money would probably be on him not being there for the draft in 2026. I wonder if Ballard's on that list as well, just because of how spectacularly Richardson has failed, even though, I mean, when Richardson was drafted, we knew it was a risk. Like, that was the thing. Like, you're taking a swing on this guy. They took the swing, he missed. And I do wonder, despite that track record, despite there's still talent on that team, it's not the best and they have holes obviously, but like a lot of teams would take their receiving core. They lost a lot of two key guys on the offensive line, but they've got like good guys in the defensive front. Like there's a lot on that team that you would like, but I do wonder if Ballard, this is just going to be, well, he never found the quarterback and that's kind of it. And I wonder if that's where we're headed.
He's definitely in a 1-year trial period this year, where I know Jim Irsay and his daughters seemed pretty close, but it's new leadership. They're going to put their imprint on the team. It would be a natural endpoint to this era of Colts football. They were kind of very Cowboys-esque, by the way. The Colts, the way we're, who knows? I think maybe a lot of this was just about having an elite offensive line, and I think they rested on their offensive line laurels for too long, where they didn't reinvest enough in that line. And then when it began to fall apart, kind of the whole project began to fall apart. But Chris Ballard, I think, is on like a 1-year probationary period this year. And it's not a good situation to be in when your quarterbacks are Daniel Jones and Anthony Richardson, where his odds of not being here this time next year are very high.
It seems less than ideal.
Yes.
As we were talking about worst GMs, I did want to talk about Mickey Loomis because I just wanted to ask the question, what are we doing? Like, what are we doing here? But I don't know if we have time to do that. So we have to talk about Ryan Poles. You brought up baseball into our first episode where we talked about the best GMs, which go back into the feed, listen to that. It was a good one. I have to bring up Ryan Poles here because I feel like he is our a true three true outcomes king.
Yes.
Like I feel like,
yes.
It's either a strikeout or a home run.
Yes.
Like that's where we are with Ryan Poles and what he's doing. And I even think about like this offseason where I think pretty universally, certainly with me, but I don't think this is a controversial opinion, what he did on the offensive line, what he did, obviously getting Ben Johnson in there. I don't think we're talking enough. I brought up Mickey Loomis. I don't think we're talking enough about getting Dennis Allen in, a defensive coordinator who seems like just one of those guys that maybe he's not a head coach, but he's a pretty good defensive coordinator. And so getting that to happen, like, I think all of that's good. But then I also look at like what they did on defense with, the older Grady Jarrett and, what they did there. Like, and I'm like, did you really make yourself better? So it's just like, I think 3 true outcomes, like that's the perfect way to explain the Poles experience to this point, given what we've seen with Claypool and Moore and all this stuff. It's been a wild ride to get here. And I don't know where we're going from here.
Football season is right around the corner, and there's no better way to lock in your fantasy dominance early than with Best Ball on DraftKings, where you draft once and ride your roster all season long. And right now, DraftKings is giving all customers a can't-miss offer. Draft one, get one. Enter a lineup in the $15 million Best Ball contest for just $20, and you'll score another Best Ball ticket to play free for a share of $15 million, giving you a second shot to win big. It's easy. Just draft your dream team once, no weekly management required, and let your top scorers automatically start each week. Across the whole season, every breakout star, every clutch play, every touchdown will count towards your quest for a share of $15 million. And if you're looking for someone to plug into your best ball lineup, there's nothing better to buy than year 2 wide receivers. Looking at wideouts that have been selected outside of the top 24 based on years in the league, second-year wideouts have delivered the highest hit rates for beating their ADP and delivering wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2 scoring seasons. Download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app now to draft your $20 best ball lineup to play for a share of $15 million and get a second ticket to play free for a share of $15 million. That's 2 chances to win big without ever setting your lineup again. Draft one, get one. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours.
Ryan Poles, he's ranked 23, firmly in the zone of like, might not be here next year.
Yeah.
Everyone knows his job is on the line. I don't think anyone really expected him to be fired this offseason. It was clear, like his job's on the line offseason, and he knows that as well as anyone else. And so, if your job's on the line, like, what's the best thing you can do as an NFL GM? Like, get the best possible head coaching candidate you can. And like he was executiving. What's the word I'm even looking for? Like, his job was on the line. Like, or if I was in Ryan Poles' position in January, I would say, how could I save my job? Well, hiring Ben Johnson would probably be a good way to do that. And he needed to hit that home run, and then he did. He somehow convinced Ben Johnson to, infamously choosy head coaching candidate, to leave a division rival, come down to Chicago at a time of kind of dysfunction in Chicago. Even after, I think, 7-10 last year, very, very dysfunctional season, dysfunctional rookie year from the franchise player, Caleb Williams, but he needed to land a big fish head coaching candidate, and he did that. And I do think with Ryan Poles, that could almost be the seed of his undoing. Like, Ben Johnson strikes me as someone where there could eventually be a power struggle, or they could just win 11 or 12 games this year. And like I say in the article, be on their merry way together as a pairing for 5 or 10 years. But he desperately needed things to go right this offseason. He got the biggest thing he needed to go right. He did probably stabilize the offensive line. Defense, I think he's gambling. The core was already pretty good. And Matt Eberflus was a good defensive-minded head coach, say what you will. Dennis Allen, no one thinks he's a good head coach. Everyone thinks he's a good defensive coordinator. I think he's going to try to ride the status quo on defense and then just hope he's improved things enough on offense. Where, he's a big ideas guy. And a lot of them have not gone right. But his big 2025 idea of hiring Ben Johnson seems pretty good.
Yeah, and I mean, that's it. Like, is Caleb Williams going to play like what you expected him to play whenever you made that pick? And if the answer is yes, Poles is going to be fine. And I'd assume this team will be good. I mean, they're in a murderer's row of how do we end up with these divisions?
I don't know. I know it is.
It's wild.
Several have 4 just clearly excellent teams, and several have 4 of the most mediocre teams you've ever seen.
Yeah, I like, what if the Bears were in the NFC South? I like the Bucs, and we will talk about Jason Light actually on the next episode. Pat's going to stick around, but I like, if the Bears are in the NFC South, the conversation around them is probably a little bit different given like who they'd be playing. But like this murderer's row we're facing in the in the NFC North, it's just wild. But yeah, does Ben Johnson work to make Caleb Williams who we thought he could be? And if that's the case, well, you're going to have him ranked a lot higher next year. Would be what I would.
It's been the classic. Oh, you had him ranked 23rd last year. Now he's 9th. What's that all about?
As it turns out. As it turns out. That's it for the worst GMs. Excuse me. There's a lot more over at rotoworld.com with Pat's GM rankings, big write-ups of every single GM in the NFL. Make sure you go and check that out. We're going to be back for one more episode this week to talk about the toughest GM to rank. Make sure you stick around for that. Make sure you head over to sharp.football where you can order our fantasy draft kit powered by Rich Rebar. You can also order the 2025 football preview from Warren Sharp. You get $5 off using promo code SHARP5. Check that out. And again, just subscribe on YouTube, subscribe where you get your podcast. Listen to that 3rd episode, and we'll be back to talk with you real soon.